Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people, but our children are alienated from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to the country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Nakarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Nakarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
Good evening. What a wonderful way to start. I'm Lee Levers. I'm the chairperson of the Aboriginal Support Group Manning in Pittwater. Balakai Gibali, Yakadai Nakai, Ringai, Rinajini Bahong. That means you and me come together tonight as one on Goongai country. Now, settle back. We're going to get the full information of the ordinary statement from the heart. Please give a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Geoff Scott.
I just wish to acknowledge the people whose land we have this meeting tonight, the Gadigal people, their ancestors and their elders and their people themselves. My name is Geoff Scott. I'm a Wiradjuri from Western New South Wales. The Uluru statement itself and the call for a voice is not something new. It goes back to the 1930s. It's been going for many decades. But the people whose voice is denied, the people who keep fighting for that voice, and that's what we're doing today. And we had a voice in the days when ATSEC and the rest of the organisations were around, but that voice hasn't been there now for 20 years. And people are missing it. In recent times there are many reports about these issues. I think there's been 11 reports, about 10 inquiries about the recognition. There's the Kirribilli statement, the Uluru statement, and there was the Yarrabah Reformation, all about this current Uluru statement itself. But just to start off with, we fought this for 5 years when everyone said no, it wouldn't happen, but we still stayed there and kept going with it. But now we're embarking on a renewed journey of hope. But as a nation, I think we've been sitting around for a decade with no leadership at the national level. And we'll be honest about that. It's been missing, not just from Aboriginal Affairs point of view, but from the nation's point of view. And in May, we finally elected a leader. And we'll have to say, well, finally we have a leader in the lodge. And his speech, that's P.M. Albanese's words, on election night, really gave us heart and hope. We moved from a nation ruled by fear to a nation ruled by hope. And he in no uncertain words, committed himself to implementing Uluru's statement in full in his first term of government. That was a great boon for us. We waited for 5 years for that. In 2015, we embarked on a whole series of dialogues. I used to work for the Referendum Council back then. We went around the country and held these dialogues. We were promised enough resources to do 38 of them. We got enough to do 13. So we're always good to go through that process. But they were about the dialogues themselves. That many people know about what happened in those dialogues and how we set them up and what happened themselves. I think it's an important part of the story to go through it. Because back then, the government had decided all these series of different events that would happen and what we discussed about the referendum itself. If you remember in 1999, the then Prime Minister Howard actually held a referendum, or he convened a referendum, on recognition of the Constitution, at the same time the Republic one was on. Both were defeated. Now, after that, there were many inquiries and they worked through them. And then the government provided an opportunity at a moment where they went back and said, you can go out and consult with people. And I said, well, we'll consult with Aboriginal tribal people. How are you going to go about it? And they said, we'll do ours by social media. And we said, well, we're not going to do that way. We're going to go out and talk to people. So we held 30 forums around the country. And in those forums, we tried to structure them. They were very structured in a way. There was a deliberative process. We made sure there were 60% of the participants in the meetings were cultural authority, land councils, tribal groups, traditional owners. We made sure that 20% of the people were from the organisations, ones who deliver all the services, who knew what was going on. And we made sure there was enough room for individuals, so 20% had to be for individuals who didn't have a voice, who didn't belong to organisations. Try and get that void. And each meeting was held over 3 days, and they had a very substantial debate. I think it started at lunchtime on the first day, and the first day was usually about venting. So many people hadn't had the opportunity to come together for 20 years. So people needed the opportunity to vent, get their issues out on the table. And that assisted in the process for the next few days. But we went through a very deliberative process where people sat there for 3 days and went through what all the different, if you like, constitutional suggestions had been. We made an amendment to 5126. In the end, the forum said, well, it doesn't matter how you change 5126, the government can still discriminate against us. So why bother? We know what the law says about 5126, let's not start again. They moved about removing section 25. Well, it didn't affect us much anyway. Does anyone know what these sections mean? I can go through them if you like. Oh, okay. 5126 is the racist power. Up until 1967, 5126 said that the Commonwealth Government can make laws for any race except Aboriginal people. The states wanted to control their blacks and they fought hard in 1901 and got the power to keep control of blacks. That's where the protection boards came in and all those other measures. But in 67 that changed. Because the Commonwealth got power to make laws for Aboriginal people as well, concurrent power, so both state and Commonwealth had power. Section 25 is a section which actually said, it was borrowed from the American Constitution, it actually says that if a state or a jurisdiction stops people from voting on the basis of race, they will lose a proportion of their representatives. There's a penalty for doing that. So it's a bit of a... And saying, if you're going to not do the right thing, well, we'll cut the number of representatives you have. It's never happened, never been used, so it's sitting there, but people don't like it because it refers to race. Let's look at having a racial discrimination provision, prevention of racial discrimination. Well, the current laws on race discrimination apply to everyone except the Commonwealth Parliament. It was put in the Constitution, the Commonwealth Parliament can still discriminate. It's called special measures. They can discriminate if it's for our own good. And they've done it a number of times. And then putting that provision in the Constitution wouldn't have changed anything. They can still do it. There was acknowledgement, which had been attempted at symbolism in 1999 and rejected. Both by Aboriginal people and by the referendum, by the people of Australia. Then there was agreement making, a few other provisions. So these forums went through those 5 provisions and in the end they rejected them all. And I said, well, and the point there was they said, we did this, nothing's going to change. We're just fiddling. if we're going to go to a referendum, let's do something that's substantial, something that will change what's going on. They want a structural reform, they want acknowledgement. The 1999 provision was going to say Aboriginal people were here once. We acknowledged they were. And people didn't like it. The campaign ran, and it ran dead, and it didn't get anywhere. The Curability Convention in 2014 or 15, I think, was of about 80 Aboriginal leaders from around the country, and they rejected the notion of symbolism outright. That upset the then ministers, was it Howard and Short, I think it was in those days. Anyway. But we held those 13 forums over those 3 days, and each one of those forums elected 10 people to go to the National Convention. That was the last meeting. All those people from all those conventions came together, plus some others who had to go. Although the forum itself it upset a few people, because when we first set the National Convention up, we invited the politicians, and then when we told all the forums, the meetings how we're going to do it, they said, why? They're the problem. So we uninvited them, and they didn't like that. And we uninvited all the people who already had a voice. So this is about people exercising their voice who didn't have one before. But what they come up with in the forums was having a voice. And it was actually getting back to say we have a say in what affairs are affecting us. They have the headspace and the time and the forums that come together and discuss and provide advice about what's going on. And I was saying there was issues discussed like intervention. And out in the bush, the Ross River meeting, we had 6 different interpreter services translating every question and then every answer over 4 days. An interesting but a fascinating thing to watch. But they were very much focused on what the government had done. The IAS scheme which the government was running at the time kept a lot of criticism. The cash card, the removal of CDP, the failure to address domestic violence issues. It's a whole range of things. Every level of government sort of dropping the ball on social housing, on infrastructure, lots of different issues. And they're the same in reality, people say, well, they're the same for the whole of Australia. They just impact on us more. But in that, there's a couple of points I want to stress. The first one is there was a sequence that was put in place. You hear a lot of debates at the moment going on, we want treaty first, we want truth telling first, and we want something else. The forum came back to the point they wanted the voice first. And the reason for that is you had to level the playing field. You couldn't have truth telling or treaty if you had such an unequal power imbalance. The state is not going to let you do treaty or truth telling unless if you don't have that power imbalance equalised somewhat, so make sure it happen properly. That was part of their thinking and what they wanted to do. And it was not, the voice was not to actually take the place of treaties or take the place of original owners at all. It was to facilitate that and make sure people had a voice. Provide an effective lobby so some matters could get on the ground. And that was followed by the Makarrata Commission, which was to do truth telling and treaty. The other point was it had to be a protected voice enshrined in the Constitution. And the reason for that? Go to every voice that Aboriginal people have had in the country. Every time the government didn't like it, they abolished it. Be it the NAC, the NAC, ADC, ATSIC, sorry. I suppose speaking in code, sorry. NAC was the National Aboriginal Conference. ATSIC was the Aboriginal Torres Strait Island Commission. The National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, they were all abolished when the government decided they didn't like the advice. It happens all the time. So going down that road was a sort of a road paved with disappointment and frustration again. And they said, we don't want to do that again. If it is, well, why bother? We don't want to go there. So it had to be in the Constitution, it had to be protected. And then they made the point that if issuing this invitation, it shouldn't go to the politicians, they're the problem, it should go to the people. So the words were very carefully crafted to a point where it was issued to the Australian people. And this was a conversation between Australian people, not a conversation with the Parliament. The then PM, it was Turnbull, rejected it outright, called it a, what do you call it, third chamber? Said it wouldn't wash. And so did the opposition, so did Barnaby Joyce. But well, since that time, they both said they were wrong and they're now supporting it, which is strange, but still. But when Turnbull rejected the voice, we said, well, that's not really a no. We didn't issue it to him, so how can you reject it? So I said, we're going to keep fighting for this, so we kept lobbying and going through it. We have done ever since. And the polls to date have been to the point where we're still running at between 60 and 70% support around the country. Some states higher than others, but lower. So we know where the soft spots are, we know where the high spots are, and it's our job really to go out and talk to people and convince them. And the very fact that we haven't been able to do that in the last 5 years has put a bit of pressure on us, that we need to get out there quickly. And the reason we're not out there saying things so quickly right now is the government hasn't made their mind up yet on the question, or the amendment, or the timing. So you don't have to fire your bullets off before it's too early. You don't have to get out there and do a whole range of consultation. The government decides to do something different, you've got to start again. So it's about getting the timing and the mix right. What the previous government also did was to embark on a process of to legislative voice. They said they support the Uluru Statement, but they were going to actually legislative voice to the government, which is exactly what we said we didn't want. And the Calma-Lincoln report, or the White-Morrison report, what do you want to call it, was actually a walk-away report. Walked away from the Uluru Statement. We don't support it, we don't do it now. And in fact, it actually documented what's on the ground now, what everyone agreed was wrong, it wasn't working. So I think Morrison said, well, if it doesn't work, we'll document it and then we'll legislate it. Now, how he thought that was going to get me beyond me, but we weren't the only thing he voted on. So they documented the failure and they're going to legislate it. That was problematic, but both Minister White has now endorsed the Uluru Statement in full. And to be fair to him, when he first came to be Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs, he actually supported the Uluru Statement, but as soon as he did it, his colleagues gave him fair hammering. So he had to change his mind and pursue something different. So we shouldn't be too hard on him. But the current government's made an absolute commitment to implement this in their first term, and we're very pleased about that. We're not sure of the timing, but we think it'll be, well, there's a whole range of processes to go through. Are you interested in going through that detail? Some people do, some people don't. I'm very anal, so I like detail. If you like the Constitution, it's quite very boring, but I don't. I don't think people realise in this country how important the Constitution is and how it rules your life every day. Well, at the last poll, 60% of Australians didn't know we have a Constitution, let alone what it said. That's because I think we're a very lucky country. We've never had a trauma in our own soil. We don't have a need to go to the Constitution, because in the main, the Australian public is very comfortable. But that's both a good thing and a bad thing. But the point about why do we need a voice? The government estimates we spend $30 billion a year and have done for 3 or 4 decades in Aboriginal affairs, with no change. We don't think that's a good outcome. We've had 24 years to close the gap, with the gap widening. Not a good policy. Again, things you want to measure. We've had the intervention, the cash card, the AIS program, which we'd like to have a Royal Commission into, not something that was corrupt. And the walk away from social housing is affecting so many people. But that's the sort of thing. But in terms of the task in front of us, there's been 155 attempts to have a referendum in this country since 1901. The government has deemed on 44 occasions we can have a vote, so they've blocked 110 of them. The local government has been blocked 4 times, it's just one of them. So of those 44, 8 were successful. We hope to be the 45th one to get through the Parliament and the 9th one to be successful. People talk about having to have bipartisanship and what the process is, but the current referendum machinery is still an act which hasn't been changed since the 70s. There were no social media in the 70s, and all the different provisions we have now just didn't exist. We're trying to get the government to upgrade and modernise the Act before they go to the referendum. We hope they're going to do that before Christmas. We're not sure. So we'll see how that goes. At the moment, if the current one goes through as it is, you've got to get the full question, so it's a bit complicated, but you've all got to be mailed the yes and the no case. I mean, directly mailed. You can't have email or anything else, you've got to get directly mailed at your post office. That's what it actually says. And the other point is we've got to ensure we get a double majority which is half the people in half the states. Is that clear, how that works? Okay, by half the states, we have to get 50% of the Australian people plus 1 as a whole, like everyone who votes. And then we have to get 4 of the 6 states. That's why we have to concentrate on the popular states, New South Wales, Queensland. Because if they don't, they can drag the other states down. We drop below 50%. And by 4 of the 6 states, in constitutions, territories don't matter because they're not a state. It's only since 77 they've been allowed to vote in the referendum. Before that they weren't. That's one of the amendments back then. So we've got to get half the people and half the states. So we must get at least 4 of the 6 states must vote 50% plus 1 at least. And the overall population had to do it. That doesn't sound like much, but the success in conversion rate hasn't been great. We're not a country that likes to change things. We like the status quo. So if you can't convince someone it needs to change, they won't vote for it. And that's the task in front of us. But again, a push for this, for why this is so important and why we're pushing for the constitutional enshrinement, is that we want structural change. That's where it will make a difference. We have a whole swathe of people who are telling us now that it's too weak, it's only advisory, so it won't make a difference. Then we have equally on the other side, another group of people saying it's too strong, it's going to corrupt the whole system of democracy. So we're in the middle, maybe we're right. We'll see. So all these debates will happen. Sadly, the reporters tend to focus on the noisy ones on both ends of the spectrum. We've got to try and fill the middle ground and give some sensible debate so people can have an informed decision. And there's debate about what the voice will make decisions on and whether it will use testicle. By testicle, I mean will the courts interfere and say what it says and what it doesn't do, and then overrule the judges, overrule the politicians. Well, if you don't try and define it and just listen, the judges have no role. So there won't be any lawyers. Trying to convince a politician of that is a very difficult thing to do. So that's what it is, but again, we think the time is right now. We think this is a once in a generation, a once in a lifetime event. I think the time is right and the time is now. We're pushing the government very hard to hold a referendum. We're pushing them to have the Referendum Machinery Act, that is to change the details of how a referendum is held by Christmas. They've only got a couple of weeks, so we'll see how they go. We're trying to get them to put the bill into the Parliament by, at the latest, July next year. And the reason the timing of the bill is important is that for a referendum bill to get through, it's got to be passed by both houses of the Parliament. So it's got to pass the Senate and the House of Representatives. And on the very day it passes the second house, a trigger is pulled. And it says that the referendum must be held within not less than 2 months and not more than 6 months. So as soon as that trigger hits, the window is set. And that's why the government's going to be very careful about when it gets introduced at the Parliament, when it comes out. They've got to be ready. They can't start planning when it goes through Parliament. They must be prepared well before that. So that's why it's important when it goes in. And we expect it to come out of Parliament in about August. That'll give us an October-November window. So that's what we're looking at. We think it's too long to go any longer than that. That's where it is at the moment. But we think this is the most positive vote you can make for this. It's the most practical thing you can do. Is give people a voice. Let them have a say about what's happening. Now, does anyone know how the government got the $30 billion and what they spend on Aboriginal affairs? It's a whole inquiry. It took two and a half years to work it out. Well, they got the budgets of every state government and every territory government and took 3.5% as the bottom figure. So everything, 3.5% to Aboriginal people, so defence, Prime Minister's salary, everything. And then they said, oh, because you're in jail so much, we'll triple that, so double all that one. Because you're on the dole, we'll double that by 4 times. So they increased that. And they said, because a lot of you live in remote areas, that costs a lot of money to give you services, so we'll triple that as well. And then they added in the civic services, and that's how they got the 30 billion. Not a lot of science to it, I don't think. The Uluru Statement won the Sydney Peace Prize last last Thursday night, it was awarded. And Pat Anderson was he's one of our co-chairs, an amazing woman who's been fighting for years. Our campaign is led by women, which is a difference for us as well. And their focus is a little different to there's a few campaigns running on this. There's enough work for 10, but there's 4 running at the moment. The government doesn't like that. They'd like us all to combine, but we're resisting that. So our campaign is run by women. You'll never see us have a go at someone. You'll never see us go low, because they won't let us. That's not how you talk to people. You stay high. If someone abuses you, Wear it. Point out what's wrong with their argument, but stay high. That's our campaign, is what you'll see about it. And that's, I think, a reflection of two very powerful women. That's Patty Anderson and Megan Davis, who are running the campaign with us. But one thing Pat said on last Thursday night, she was asked a question. She wasn't scripted, she wasn't asked about it, she sort of thought about it on the spot, and she just said, well, a lot of noise out there, but when you go into that booth, he said, there's only 10 things you wrestle with, that's you and your own conscience. You make the vote, the politicians don't. So you've got to decide where you stand and where you cast your vote. So when you get in the box, remember, it's you and your conscience. Think about it now. No. I think she's an amazing woman who comes out with these things all the time. The other complicating factor is this is because we've had no leadership at the Commonwealth level now for 10 years, or longer than that in some respects, all the states have commenced their process already. Victoria's well down the track of setting up their own voice, their own treaty, their own truth-telling. UNT is well down the track. Queensland is well down the track. New South Wales, no, not so much. We have we don't have a Labor government here. But part of this design, people are asking us now, why we're not talking about the detail of the voice. But we live in a democracy. In a democracy, Parliament determines what the voice says, what the detail is. Even though people claim we're trying to destroy democracy, we're not. So the people who will decide what the details are of the voice and how it will be structured, what powers it has, what budget it has, is the Parliament, is the politicians we have elected to go there. We need to lobby them as well after the referendum. So that's their job. And that's how it should work properly. There are many that think we should be doing it now, and they're the same people that think we're corrupting democracy, but they're asking us to corrupt democracy. Yeah. I'm sure there's some internal logic there somewhere. But this reform is about first principles, and it's, there will be a voice because there should be. It will provide advice to Parliament because it's a matter of right and best practice. And I'll make that point again, it's the Parliament's role to have power over its makeup, its structure, because that's how our Constitution works. And it'll provide a permanent authority of institutions to negotiate the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. That relationship is not a great one at the moment. It's suffered very badly over the last decade, but it can be rebuilt and can be redone. I think one of the big jobs of the voice, when it gets in, is actually to repair that relationship. Although, in reality, there's a job to repair the relationship between the whole of Australian government, not just with Aboriginal people government. Government doesn't treat us very well. But finally, after 233 years, it'll be a substantive step forward. And the Aboriginal people will be at the table when decisions are made, and be part of the solution, and not just be the problem that people talk about. So that's all I want to say with that, and just to go to questions and try and answer whatever questions you have. But again, I think it's the most positive thing you can do if you can vote for that. Many of us sitting around here won't see the benefits of this initiative, but our kids will. All of our kids, your children and our children, and probably their children, and that's what we've got to focus on. This country can be a much better place, and we've got to work to make it that place. So thank you. Are there any questions?
The headline that we see of the Uluru statement is not voice, treaty, truth.
The sequencing was very deliberate. Again, it's very much saying we needed to change the power imbalance before you can move on to doing treaty, and then consequently debate was then about, do you need truth-telling before you have treaty, do you need treaty before truth-telling? They weren't decided. That's why they decided on the Makarrata Commission, which is a commission set up to work out how we would do this. We've had truth-telling in this country for every year. We had little children, they bring them home report. Nothing implemented. We had the Royal Commission of Deaths in Custody. Some of them are implemented. I mean, Royal Commissions are about when the government has a catastrophic failure in public administration, so you have a Royal Commission. Gives them 5 years of doing nothing and then doing nothing at the end of it. Disgraceful things. But all those evidences, and the inquiry into the Northern Territory youth detention centres, again, not one recommendation implemented. So what you need when you have truth telling or have those sort of issues is someone to actually follow up, make sure it's implemented. And that goes across the board. I mean, the Royal Commission into the financial system, have they implemented those ones yet? Nope. The Royal Commission into the fires, have they implemented that one yet? Nope. That's something you can ask the politicians all the time. But from an Aboriginal point of view, we have these truth-telling commissions all the time and nothing happens. We just spin on the merry-go-round, we get off again. Everyone says, okay, it's been 10 years, start again. The trouble is we have another generation of our kids just sit there and suffer the same. And that's not acceptable. That's why we have that sequence. One is to put the power in balance, so we try and tilt that to a point where we can have some real focus on truth-telling and treaty. I mean, a lot of people advocate for treaty and sovereignty at the moment. You'll see those out there all the time. We went through the whole issue about whether a voice would affect sovereignty. Our view is no. We have very strong legal evidence about that. We see that debate in the press all the time. There are those treaty advocates who will say there's been no advice, but we had 7 inquiries where advice was given all the time. But the question was asked, did Prime Minister Albanese get the advice when he did the Gama speech? Well, no, he didn't, but he had all the advice from 7 inquiries. So he didn't need to waste our money again. So that's why it's been put in place, and that's why the structure, and that's why it hasn't gone any further than that, because they think it should be done properly. This is about putting a voice as a concept and a principle and the right thing to do to the Australian people. And it's about, and to feel the people's heart about doing the right thing. Do you care about what's happening in the country? If you're really hard-headed about it, do you care about so much money being wasted? We care to the fact that all this money is being wasted and people are put through the ringer all the time. They're churned all the time. We just had, what's it called, robo-debt. They did it again. And no one's going to get done for that either. They just churn people. We want somewhere we can actually address that and not have our children suffer again. 38% of the jails are Aboriginal people. 40% of the kids are Aboriginal. On the women's side, it's even greater. Something's wrong, but it's not being addressed. And we can't let it continue. And these are the sorts of things the Voice wants to address. It's not just on treaty, it's on many more things than that. So it's having that broad concept about it, but it's also considering what we have on the ground now. It's not to challenge the Coalition of Peaks or the Close the Gap initiatives. They've all got great intentions, but they're not working either. So when it gets down to it, nothing changes on the ground. So it's about how we put that in place. So that's why the sequence is so important.
Hi, I know people are here to hear about Uluru, but I think people would also love to hear just a tiny bit about yourself, your own family, and what happened to your Wiradjuri elders when the white settlers came to your area. Could you spend a couple of minutes on that?
Yeah, I can. I'm from central New South Wales. I grew up in Narromine. I didn't know until I was 15 why we lived in Narromine, because my grandmother moved us there because there was no mission. So I was very lucky. I had a very strong maternal line which looked after our family. So very lucky. So that's where it was, but in terms of that, we lived in Narromine itself. So I left there when I was young because there was nothing, there's no jobs in the bush. So you come out of it. So my country goes from Condobolin up to Gilgandra, down to Wellington and back out west, back out to about Cobar, or a bit less than Cobar. That's my country, that's my people, where it comes from. So we're northern Wiradjuri. Wiradjuri is quite a big nation with many different subgroups. And the impact of colonisation out there has been the same as anywhere. I mean, I could start on what I think about colonisation and what I think about the rest of it, but we're here, we don't have all night or tomorrow. But colonisation is about subjugating the land and subjugating the people. And if you wanted to take over the land, you had to remove the people. To remove the people, you put them on missions, or you destroyed them. You took their families away. That's how you destroy a culture and destroy a people, you remove it. It's a very deliberate act. It didn't just happen in Australia, it happened everywhere. It was very particularly focused in Australia how they went about it. But it's how colonials these days maintain the power. Those with money seem to like to hang on to it. Those with the land and assets seem to like to hang on to it. The same thing happens. It hasn't ceased. So that's happened very much to my own people out west. Again, the same things affected out there. Unemployment rates are terrible, the housing rates are terrible, the crime and imprisonment rates are bad. It's about doing something about it. I spent 35 years in the public service. I'm now trying to make up for my misdemeanours. I thought I could change it from the inside, but maybe I was a bit silly and stupid, but anyway, I worked it out in the end, I couldn't, so I left. I think my public service career ended when John Howard became Prime Minister, and he said, here's the policies I wish to implement. If you agree to implement them, you can be CEO of ATSIC. And I said, well, I can't do that, Prime Minister. And he said, well, we have one more discussion. I said, what's that? He said, when you leave. And I said, looked at the clock and I said, well, it's 12, how about 3? So that was it. But since then, it's been a great relief to actually get out of the government and start working for community. Don't get me wrong, there are many people in government who are doing the right thing and are working very hard to do it. They don't have the tools nor the backing. There's got to be a will to make change. And we think the voice will give that will and that focus to it.
Hi Jeff, I'm Dale. My question is around the voice in its simple terms or complex terms. The arguments against it seems to be that we need all the detail, but then the Prime Minister saying, look, no, we just need to vote on the substantive fact, do we need it or not. What's your thoughts in terms of why one is better than the other and how lack of detail may impact people's decision on how they vote?
Okay. There's enough detail in the conception of what the voice should do. It's all out there. It's been out there for 5 years. People just haven't read it. We're trying to synthesise that now. The reason we're not going out telling you now is because the government hasn't decided on a few key points. If we go out and tell you something now and they make a different decision next month, the only thing that people will seize on is what the difference was. That's why we're not out there. In terms of veto versus others, there is no way in the world Parliament's going to agree to having a referendum bill which overrides the power of itself. So being pragmatic about it, it's just ludicrous to even think it'll happen. Create a body which overrides their own decision making and can veto what they say, that's just not going to happen. People are asking for it, but I think I call them howlers. They howl at the moon, hoping for change. It's not going to happen. So that's why we're very practical about this. We think having a permanent lobby will be an effective way of having a voice to affect change. And then when that lobby comes in place and when the voice does come into effect, it's up to people on the voice to make it work. If the Australian people, as we hope, agree with this and vote positive for this, it's up to us then to make it work and honour that support and commitment. Because we do think most Australians are fair-minded and decent people. But in terms of that veto power, we don't go there because it'll never happen. All the sovereignty people are asking the government for sovereignty of a body that they say doesn't have the sovereignty to give it back to them. I don't know how that works either, but people do that because people are frustrated, they need to be seen to be taking some action. They've been pursuing this path for 20 years. They're not going to be persuaded from it easily. We understand their point of view and where it's going to. We've got to weather that and get to the point where, not that we're going to say they're wrong, it's a position of getting down the fact that we can show that things can be done. We can do more than one thing at once. It's picked like the Liberals saying, well, we want you to address domestic violence, we want you to address this, and not the voice. And I said, well, last time I saw it, you can do more than 2 things at once. Maybe Liberals can't, but I'm sure Labor can.
One of the arguments that I've heard against the voice is that we're all equal now, and why should one group in Australia have a special voice? And maybe other the people of Greek ethnicity, maybe they should have a voice. I know it's rather ludicrous, but that's okay. What do you say to that?
I hear it often. It's come up a lot. There's only one group of people here when the country was colonised. Those Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. We think it's only just and right that those people be recognised in the Constitution. I think it's an injustice they weren't recognised when the Constitution was first made up. I mean, part of the problem was not just Cook, but Phillip actually ignored his orders. He was supposed to treat. He did not. He was supposed to set up agreements. He did not. that's setting in place a whole range of different things which have brought us to the position we are today. But in terms of that question, everyone talks about equal and equal, but I think it's fair and just to acknowledge the people that were here when the country was colonised. It happens everywhere else. Australia is a legal backwater in the world. We're the only Western democracy without a Bill of Rights. We're the only Western democracy that doesn't recognise its Indigenous people. Last time we had a change in government was brought about by common law, the Mabo decision. Now that worried people for the first time, even though they fought against it for many, many years. The Mabo decision put in place that there was a system of government and a system of structure before the British arrived. And they put in place laws to give that effect to it. There's a whole series of other laws now that are saying, but the trouble with Mabo, it actually moved from the point of saying there was no one living here to say there were people here, but it was settled, not conquered. I don't want to give a lecture about law, but if you move to the second tranche of the law, the law actually comes to get a case which says the country was invaded, well, by international law, the existing law must remain. And I don't think the Australian legal system could manage that. That's why it's been pushed back. But my point about the question is there's only one group of people here when the country was, one, settled, and when the Constitution was put in place. And the failure to acknowledge that the Constitution was unjust and unfair and just not the right thing to do. That should be corrected. And the issue of having a voice is we finally get a say in what's going on. We haven't had one. And, well, there are circumstances for it, but Aboriginal people don't have a lobby. Maybe we had an effective lobby that wasn't destroyed every time the government got upset with it, we wouldn't be in this position. But the reason we're asking for this now is because over the time, the voice has been squashed every time. The only way you can protect it is by going to the Australian people, not the Parliament. So that's why the invitation was issued to the Australian people, not to the politicians and not to Parliament. Because we want this question answered by the Australian people. Now, if the Australian people say no, well, you have to accept that decision. We don't think they will. And people can say that you should have everyone, if you like, referred to in the Constitution, but we're talking about different circumstances. And we have many people who are just trying to find things to argue about, things to find wrong with it, and people make their lives on that. They're money people who work for Sky News or The Australian, but it sells papers. We like to be amused and entertained, not informed.
When you mentioned that the forum's uninvited for the convention, uninvited people who already had a stronger voice to make sure that they could include the people who hadn't had the voice so far. So I'm curious, what effect did that have on the process and the outcome and the wording? And also, how did they achieve such a high level of, for want of a better word, democracy in terms of how close to unanimity the expression of those final words that we see there in the statement? How was that incredible cohesion achieved?
Okay, well, we're a surprise to anyone at the outcome. We try to design a process. Well, the process is designed by Megan Davis, I'll tell you. Megan's probably our preeminent constitutional lawyer, Aboriginal lawyer in the country. She's recognised overseas in all the UN committees and the rest of it. She does work in about 7 other countries in the world, assisting them with their democracy and their rules. So she's quite a revered woman. It's like boss, not no question. But she's very powerful. But the point is that she designed a program where, for the first time, it was a deliberative process so that people would come, be able to voice their concerns, but have all the issues put on the table. We had a bank of lawyers around the room. Their rule was they weren't allowed to speak unless they were asked to. And that was the rule. And if you're a lawyer coming there as a participant, no, you're asked to leave. Because people tend to actually voice their own views and issues. We wanted this to be a group thing. So that was done in a very deliberate way. So all those proposals were put to the floor, discussed, questions are asked, lawyers were told to leave, they discussed them all, come out with their own ideas. And it's documented, everything's documented, every forum, every outcome, every person's comments all documented. and the outcome and the statement, the communique and the final results are all documented as well. Everyone had to sign off before they left. That was one point about it all. But part of it, the role of people who already had a voice in every one of those regional dialogues was questioned. Because we're speaking to people who had 20 years without a voice. ATSIC to a point gave them a voice because they held regular meetings in every region. So people could come and voice their opinion. That stopped in 2003. That was when... No, sorry. It's when Mark Latham thought he'd be Prime Minister, so he decided to throw us under the bus. But good thing he didn't become Prime Minister. Disaster. But that's where it stands, and that's what happened back then. But in terms of why we think it was so anonymous that it got there, people thought about it for a long time. They turned up, they lobbied, they got together in each of those forums before they come to the National Convention with their ideas, their issues, and they turned up with all their points of view. It was quite exciting to see how it worked. We didn't think it would work, but it did. So at the forum itself, we discussed them all, they put them on the table, they moved very quickly through what it was. At the end of the second day, a 14-person committee was appointed at about 5 o'clock. And they said, before tomorrow morning, come back with the first words. But they decided what they wanted. We want a voice. We want the voice to be appealed to the Australian people. We wanted to appropriately reflect what was said at this forum and what was said at the regional forums. They had quite a task all night, put by people that would sit through everything. And what they come up with, I think, was an amazing document. I've never seen any document that's more researched, more quoted, more thought about than ever. Anyway, in the morning they finally got a document out, and the first reading was on it. So Megan Davis came out and read the document out. Everyone sort of murmured about it for 10 or 15 minutes, and people started questioning. We're going to have amendment by 280 people. So we put aside a day and a half for that. Then another 20 minutes went on, and a few people stood up and they said, stop. And Sol Blair was his name. He's not with us now. He got up and said, we can't better this. I'm now moving a motion that we accept it in full. And he sat down and people thought about it, and the chair got up and said, well, I suppose that's the form of a motion on the floor. I'll put it on the floor. Everyone stood and said yes. And that was it. It was about how we went about putting it in place. But the Uluru Statement itself is 24 pages, not one. So the full statement, you can read it, it's in the referendum report. It maps out the whole path, the rationales for each point, and the reasons where we went to. But the words themselves were, we found they were amazing when they would go about it, but it came about by that. And they came out with it, it was accepted, it was read out. And things moved very, very quickly after that. The older women from Uluru came out and said, well, the statement needs to have something prominent, so we'll do a painting. So they did. So very quickly overnight, the painting was done. A couple of days, the painting was done, the statement put up. And on the final morning, people signed it. And you'll see the signatures around the outside. Other people who attended. Then it was taken out to the rock and read out. Again, no politicians. So they weren't invited because we thought they'd try and steal the show. They always do. And that was where it came from. So it was, we were hoping for the best, and sometimes the best happened, and in this case it did. So we're as amazing as anyone else. But those 14 people who put that together overnight, assisted by another 20 or 30 people who got all the information to them, it did reflect what came out of the 13 dialogues and what came out of the deliberations. And the supporting document goes through that in detail, picking out where each word came from, where each phrase came from, which dialogue said it and who said it. That's all still recorded. And we thought that was important. That's how you have a democracy. So, but we're trying to tell people the story so they understand where it came from. And it didn't happen overnight, it wasn't by chance, but the result was amazing. And I think it's been received by Australian people with that heart. It was an appeal to people's heart. And that's how it was received.
Do you think, you mentioned that in New South Wales we're falling behind a lot of the other states in terms of having voice treaty truth.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll see movement with that over the next couple months, considering we have an election coming up?
Frankly, no. Well, I think for the Liberal government here to move against that, they've been moving against their own party. I think that internally they're still sorting out what their position is. And I don't think anyone's going to try and disrupt that. They've been very strong about not agreeing over time. They say they agree, but they don't do anything. That's consistent though. There's been many attempts to do treaties and other agreements, but no, I don't think they will. Well, I think the New South Wales got too many other things of interest. Another one is, and it's very rare that being pro-Indigenous wins your votes. And that's just a fact. We'd like to think they would, but I think they're well behind the other states at the moment. When the referendum gets up, we have to make sure we align what the state's activities are, their provisions, so it all syncs. That's going to be quite a task. At least they're well down the track. And I think part of that is recognising that work that's been done in each state. They've had a hard road to hoe, and Victoria's done an amazing job. Queensland's well down the track, and so's the Territory. But for New South Wales, they were always going to be late. I'd like to think Labor will win again, but we'll see. That sounds like I'm a Labor supporter, I suppose, but yeah. I'm not a Labor member. But anyway. I grew up in Western New South Wales, and I started out as a shearer, so I have a working class background and a union background, so I suppose I am Labor. But the same voice though, Liberal parties over the years have been our greatest, the governments who've given the biggest advances. Land rights came from Malcolm Fraser. So we must remember how it all works as well.
Hi Geoff, this is a simple question really. A lot of people are thinking, how will it actually work? And I'm just thinking there's a subject that's on our minds and hearts, many of us, at the moment, about the children in jail, not just in Western Australia, but right round Australia. And I just thought in that sort of case, how will the voice work?
Well, the first thing we've got to do is actually back to each community. We have to decide how it will be structured, but how we get the voices of people coming forward. There are many people who are trying to do they're trying to resolve and get back from that point where so many kids are in jail, where so many people are in jail. Because once you're in jail, it's like it's too late, the door's shut. You've got to try and work out how you do that. We can only do that by working with people on the ground and getting back to the communities that they come from and what the answers will be. We can't continue with 30 to 40% of the jail population being Aboriginal. It's basically saying the next generation, we've lost it again, especially with the high juvenile crime rates. So we've got to really focus on those issues. Same as domestic violence is a major issue. Although not many people know that. Where do you think the highest rate of domestic violence is in the country? The northern suburbs of Melbourne, where there are no Aboriginal people actually. Anyway. But I press can't tell you that, because it doesn't fit the stereotype. But I think that's how it will work. We have to get back to the people on the ground in each community, and the solution has to be worked out community by community to some extent. And the government has to have the flexibility to do that. I mean, every time we have an election, we have a law and order election. Every time it happens. Because the government makes people scared. When people are scared, they vote for you. And we have a media that agrees with them. But to get around that, we've got to have an effective lobby that puts more information into the public arena about what the solutions should be. There are many people working on justice reinvestment measures, which are working very well in the States at the moment, and in Canada. It's not saying we get everything from overseas. Sometimes there's good ideas, but sometimes they're worse than us. But that's how it'll work in the end. By giving people, we've got to focus on the belief that people can design and work on their own solutions. Because if their kids are in jail, and of course they want to make it better. So that's what we've got to work on.